the north and west, and the winds will pick up. So in summary, strong winds and outbreaks of heavy rain will spread north across western areas, while it will remain mainly dry in the east. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Hello and welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. You're watching on telly or listening on DAB and online. Today we'll be discussing women. What is a woman? Apparently politicians can't answer that simple question these days. The Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities was one of those, Annalise Dodds. She couldn't answer the question. We'll be talking about self-identification and what more we can do to support those in Ukraine. But first, it's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's 2 p.m. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. President Zelensky has demanded the immediate release of the mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov. It comes after Ukrainian authorities released CCTV footage which they say shows Russian forces abducting him. GB News cannot independently verify the video. However, it's reported he was kidnapped from the city, which has fallen under control of Vladimir Putin's forces. The German Chancellor and French President spoke to President Putin this morning in a 75-minute phone call. They urged him to issue an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. However, President Zelensky has criticised Western nations for a lack of involvement in peace negotiations. He's also called on them to speak out against the kidnapping of an elected official.
The demand is simple: to release him from captivity immediately. We appeal to all world leaders who speak to Moscow, France, Germany, Israel and others. I have personally called German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. I spoke with French President Emmanuel Macron. I will talk to everyone to free our people. We expect them, the world leaders, to show how they can influence the situation.
President Zelensky there. A war against Russia in Ukraine would be World War III. That's according to US President Joe Biden. In a tweet, he stressed that the United States would defend every inch of NATO territory, but said a direct confrontation must be prevented. Meanwhile, the US continues to send troops to assist NATO allies. 130 soldiers have deployed from Fort Stewart in Georgia. They're on their way to Europe to help deter Russian aggression.
The idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III.
President Joe Biden. The bulk of Russian forces are now around 15 miles away from the centre of Kyiv. That's according to the UK's Ministry of Defence. Meanwhile, the cities of Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy and Mariupol remain encircled and they're suffering heavy Russian shelling. President Zelensky has accused Russia of refusing to allow people out of Mariupol and says efforts are being made to deliver food and medicines there. Health Secretary Sajid Javid told GB News that the UK is sending medical equipment to Ukraine.
We've been working very hard with our Ukrainian friends ever since the start of the conflict on humanitarian aid. So far, in terms of medical support, we've sent out 6 flights from the UK full of medical supplies and equipment and vital medicines and wound packages. We're coordinating also with our European friends to make sure that together we can provide everything that is needed.
Health Secretary Sajid Javid. Meanwhile, the French president has criticised the UK government's response to helping Ukrainian refugees. Emmanuel Macron said he expected better of Britain's visa policy, which requires applicants to apply in person in Brussels or Paris. In response, the Home Office said it was bringing in measures to make the process quicker by allowing people to apply online. But speaking on the Polish-Ukrainian border, one city's deputy mayor, Boguslaw Swayze, told GB News he had seen little support from the British government.
I do not know what the UK is doing. I'm here 15th day. I'm here 16 hours per day. We are tired. There is 1.5 million refugees that have already arrived in Poland. Some estimates predict that it may be a further 6 or 7, reaching up to 8 million people. Poland will not be able to cope with that number. So yes, we do need support. We do need help, and the UK should be one of those countries helping us.
Boguslaw Swayze. The Premier League has disqualified Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich from being a director at the club. In a statement, it said the measures were imposed following sanctions by the UK government. However, it won't impact the club's ability to train or play fixtures. Under the current rules imposed by the government, the club cannot sell any new tickets or merchandise. New research from the TUC says energy bills could increase at least 14 times faster than wages this year. Their analysis shows that gas and electricity bills are set to rise by 54% when the price cap changes in April. But average weekly wages will go up by just over 3%. A government spokesperson said it recognised the strain that families are under and said it's introducing a £21 billion package of support. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on TV, radio and online. Cheers very much for your company. Here's what's coming up on the show. The author J.K. Rowling got into another trans row this week. She said Labour would call International Women's Day We Who Must Not Be Named Day. This came as two senior Labour MPs, members of Labour's government in waiting, Yvette Cooper and Annalise Dodds, wouldn't define what a woman is. With this confusion, today we'll be asking whether or not we need self-identification laws in the United Kingdom. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown tabled an urgent question in the House of Commons this week about how the Home Office is handling the Ukrainian refugee applications. He'll join me on the show to discuss this before 3. We'll have our regular campus clash where we have two students going head-to-head in a debate. Today we'll get to the bottom of whether or not the government works for young people. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love, as ever, to know your thoughts on anything we're discussing today. Tweet me at GBNews, email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. Thank you very much. Folks, you'd be forgiven after hearing the harrowing reports from GB News journalists at Ukraine's border, those depictions of women and children making it across without their dad or other loved ones that are fighting bravely for their right to self-determination. You'd see much of these scenes there and perhaps conclude that we in this country would re-evaluate our worship at the altar of whackery and wokery. But I'm afraid nothing could be further from the truth. As the bombs and the bullets fly upon maternity hospitals and so-called safe corridors for civilians, we in this country have been focusing on less pressing matters, I think it's safe to say. First up, as Police Scotland review the Scottish Government's plans to allow men to self-ID as women, and the other way around, of course, it was left to J.K. Rowling to argue that the law will harm the most vulnerable women in society, those seeking help after male violence/rape and incarcerated women. Stats show, Rowling goes on to explain, that imprisoned women are already far more likely to have been previously abused. For saying this, of course, domestic violence survivor J.K. Rowling was met by a torrent of venom and vitriol, mainly by men, it has to be said. Nicola Sturgeon decided to spend International Person with a Cervix Day, or they who must not be named in this society day, formerly known as International Women's Day, apologising to witches hundreds of years ago, apologising to those folks who've been dead a very long time, whose wands and brooms have crumbled like Scotland's NHS and education system. What about the women, I say, that need protecting today, Nicola? Even so, J.K. Rowling has been tweeting about the issue today, saying, "I don't think our politicians have the slightest idea how much anger is building among women from all walks of life at the attempts to threaten and intimidate them out of speaking publicly about their own rights, their own bodies and their own lives." She goes on to say Sir Keir Starmer publicly misrepresents equalities law in yet another indication that the Labour Party can no longer be counted on to defend women's rights. Pretty damning stuff. This comes in the week where Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper refused to actually explain what a woman is that day before. Party chairman Annalise Dodds did exactly the same. Both women reckon they're fit to run the country. Given their inability, folks, to actually look at their own bits and establish what it is that makes them different from their husbands, I'm not sure, frankly, that they're fit to run a bath, never mind the country. But their current leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has come out and said that trans women are women and that he wants to see reform of gender recognition laws. All that obsession with identity politics from Labour folks, and yet still, they haven't had a female leader. And then, folks, we had the cherry on the cake, the pièce de résistance, the reason why I'm so opposed to this madness. We had the Tavistock and Portman, an NHS Foundation Trust, England's only specialist service for children who identify as transgender. We had a review commissioned by NHS England, finding that the services are not a safe or viable long-term option. I mean, you don't say. What an outrageous state of affairs that we ever thought it was okay to put forward children as young as 10 for experimental and generally irreversible hormone treatments? How could we ever have placed ideology ahead of the protection of some of society's most vulnerable groups? It's now 2:11. As we just mentioned, J.K. Rowling can't help herself. She's got herself in another trans row. Tuesday was International Women's Day. She said Labour would call it We Who Must Not Be Named Day. This came after Annalise Dodds, the Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, said this on Radio 4's Woman's Hour when asked how to define a woman.
Well, I have to say that there are different definitions legally around what a woman actually is. I mean, you look at the definition within the Equality Act, and I think it just says someone who is adult and female, I think, but then doesn't say how you define either of those things. I think it does depend what the context is, surely. I mean, surely that is important.
Shadow Women and Equalities Minister there, even though she cannot define what a woman is. We want to get to the bottom of this on Real Britain. So GB News reporter Lily Hewitson has been out and about. She's been in Cardiff to ask people there, what's a woman?
First of all, it's biological, I think.
Being a mother, I think that being able to be a mother.
Being a woman is whatever a woman feels that she wants to be.
Yeah, she can be whatever she wants these days.
Yes.
No.
I don't think it's stereotyped as much as it used to be. A woman can be one of the boys.
Being a woman.
Crumbs. Such a difficult one.
We live longer for a start.
Oh yes, we live longer. We do. Yes. Yes. We live longer for a start.
We didn't stop there, folks. GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley has been in Hull asking the same question. What's a woman?
A childbearer. Someone who has to look after the home. So I'm more towards someone who will be at home with the kids. Yeah. That's how I'll class myself. That's how I look at what a woman is. Yeah. Feels good, isn't it? There is this aspect of, I think naturally women are nurturers. We know how to nurture people, not necessarily because they're your kids, but naturally we will just nurture. I think we gravitate towards looking after people, taking care of. Yeah.
Motherhood mainly, I think was the most standout thing that I could say.
Oh my goodness, well, I mean, putting it simplistically, your body, if that's an appropriate answer, which I haven't got. And you haven't got what I've got, putting it rather crudely.
I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself. GB News reporters Lily Hewitson and Anna Riley, thank you for carrying out the Real Britain investigation of defining what a woman is. So sticking on similar lines for our Culture Roar this afternoon, I want to discuss if we should have self-identification laws in the UK. The Scottish Government has already tabled legislation at Holyrood to make it easier for people to change their legally recognised gender. Here to discuss this, I'm joined by Brendan O'Neill, the chief political writer at Spiked, and Katie John Went, who's a non-binary transgender person and a diversity and inclusion facilitator, and Peter Tatchell, LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Brendan, can I start with you, please? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to just make the case of why we shouldn't have self-identification laws.
Because we have to adhere to reality, to biological reality, to social reality, which is that there are some people who are male and there are some people who are female. I believe in sexual equality. Women should do whatever they want. But there is a difference between the sexes. You cannot change sex. And there are some circumstances in which women want their own spaces and deserve to have their own spaces. And in that situation, it makes no sense at all that we would allow men to claim to be women.
Katie John Went, as a non-binary transgender person, should we actually have self-ID laws? Do you think that would have made your life a lot easier?
Well, I think absolutely on this case, it's a yes and no answer, which is typically non-binary of me, I guess. It's the dilemma that we have is that we've always had self-ID. And the idea that this is the current problem is because we've made it a legal issue and because we have a polarized situation in society where people have become once more kind of afraid of the bogeyman, literally, and this kind of moral panic about trans people. But we've had trans people for centuries who have always self-ID'd in many respects before we ever had the options to transition surgically or hormonally. It's actually the very nature of us having had those opportunities since the 1930s and all the way up to now to increasingly allow people the possibility of changing their bodies has created some of the newer issues. But prior to that, people had always done it. And people self-ID as it is to go into toilets. I mean, I was in Liverpool Street Station just yesterday and joining the queue of women to use the women's loos. And there were 3 men in there, but they were all wearing orange jumpsuits and were doing cleaning, and they were self-IDing as cleaners. And most people could tell in that sense who they were and what they were doing in there. But people are self-ID'd and kind of people check each other's appearances all the time, but they also most of the time just assume you're in there doing what you're meant to be doing. And self-ID is another way of saying passing in many respects, because what we're actually doing is policing people on passing. And there are more women who are challenged in women's spaces than trans are challenged in women's spaces, because we're such a small proportion of the population.
Peter, can I just put that question to you then? Are you worried about there seems to be a new trend and I think we're going to see this, in my opinion, we're going to see this more and more, a trend of detransitioning, where people who have made generally irreversible changes to their body or been placed on these hormone treatments that I mentioned earlier, they're actually saying, I think I've made a horrible error here. Are you not worried about that trend?
Well, first, let me say what we are witnessing is a witch hunt against trans people. It is a shameful, disgusting, anti-human rights agenda, which no one would ever get away with if they were targeting Muslims, gay people, or Jews, or anybody else. It is absolutely disgraceful that the way in which the whole issue is being inflamed without any concern for the welfare or well-being of trans people. And all the issues that you have raised about trans people were very similar to the issues raised against gay people in the 1970s and 1980s, when people argued against gay equality. It was the same kind of demonization. The underlying principle of this argument is that trans women are predators, that they are a threat to biological women. There is almost no evidence of that, and in the small number of cases where it has happened, that is unrepresentative, and you do not make law based on what a few bad apples do. The majority of trans women treat other women with total respect. They pass, no one even knows that they're trans. And I think, to suggest they are a threat to other women is disproven by a friend of mine who works in a women's centre in the north of England. She has said that their centre has accepted trans women for 6 years with the agreement of the staff and the women users.
Right, okay, so Brendan, you're basically arguing you and J.K. Rowling here are just behind the times. You need to get with the equality agenda and actually advance gender recognition and allow trans men and women to be recognised in wider society as they want to be.
Well, Peter's right that there is a witch hunt, but it's not against trans people. It's against women who want to defend women's rights. And Nicola Sturgeon, as you said earlier, apologised for historical witch hunts last week. She should apologise for contemporary witch hunts, which are particularly bad in Scotland, where any woman who raises questions about the transgender agenda is instantly denounced as a TERF, which is a modern version of the word witch. She sometimes might lose her job. She'll be subjected to the most vile misogynistic abuse online, to rape threats, to death threats. All of this has happened to J.K. Rowling and other women too, simply for the crime of talking about womanhood and women's rights. That is despicable. And anyone who sides with that kind of abuse should be ashamed of themselves. And we have to have freedom in this discussion, the right of women to dissent from the new woke agenda and the right of them to organise themselves as they see fit. That's the real equality agenda here, not the right of men to go into women's spaces.
I just want to put to all of you an NHS report that found that the Tavistock Gender Clinic isn't safe for children. This is England's only specialist service for young people who identify as transgender. Katie, were you concerned by the findings of NHS England here?
Well, I think all of these things need to be continually reviewed. One of the main issues with Tavistock is it's the only place where things are provided, and there is a major bottleneck there. But it's a complete myth that people walk in the door of the Tavistock and get puberty blockers and surgical transitions at a young age. They don't. You can't get surgical transition before 18. You typically don't get puberty blockers before Tanner stage 2 or 3. In your early teens or mid-teens, there's no such thing as going in at age 3 and getting all of this stuff before the age of 9 or anything like that. So there is a lot of myth being peddled out around this.
Right, but
just
Peter,
to say something,
Peter, do you believe that 3 sessions, there are some kids who've been through the Tavistock Clinic, 3 sessions and then placed on further treatment? Do you really think that 3 sessions with someone is enough to determine, frankly, whether or not you want to make generally irreversible changes to your body?
I cannot say whether that's true or not. The trans people I know have had to wait years to get any kind of treatment. Years and years, and have to go through hoops and hurdles, reviews, all kinds of interrogations about their lives. What you're saying is just not typical at all. The other thing I'd say is that there are several countries that have had self-ID for several years. None of them have had the problems that you and Brendan seem to think.
Right.
Plus,
so Brendan,
on top of
do you
that,
want to just quickly come back to that?
Well, I think the problem is the atmosphere that surrounds this discussion. It is incredibly intolerant and it is vicious and it is sometimes violent. The language is incredibly violent that is used against gender-critical feminists and gender-critical women. And I've argued before that there are elements of the transgender movement that look like misogyny in drag. It presents itself as a progressive movement, but actually it's pushing a misogynistic agenda that is directly harming women's freedoms and women's rights. All of us, I'm sure, support the right of trans people to live freely and without discrimination and to have the same rights as everyone else in society. What we're talking about here is the transgender movement, which I don't think is representative of most trans people. And that movement is saying some very problematic things and behaving in a frequently despicable way. And I'm on the side of women who want to organise and speak freely.
We'll have to leave it there. Brendan O'Neill, Katie John Went and Peter Tatchell, thank you very much for your time today. In response to that report, the Gender Identity Development Service spokeswoman said that the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust welcomes the focus of Dr Cass and her team on increasing and broadening the care and support available for this group of patients who are currently waiting far too long and on developing the evidence base. We will work with her and NHS England to support her recommendations. Still to come, we'll be talking about what more can be done here in the UK to help Ukrainians fleeing from their homeland. The Prime Minister has said an upcoming scheme will allow Britons to take Ukrainians into their homes. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
First of all, it's biological, I think.
Being a mother, I think that being able to be a mother.
Being a woman is whatever a woman feels she wants.
Start off your GB News Sunday with Stephen and Anne at breakfast from 6 a.m. At 10, join the political correction. From 12 till 6, it's Alistair, Darren, Inaya and Nana. At 7, join Free Speech Nation for a laugh that won't be cancelled. At 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight, followed by Headliners. That's Sunday on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and heavy rain and strong winds will affect Northern Ireland, Wales and Western England, but mostly dry elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. A wet and windy evening in store across much of southwest England, though something a bit drier and clearer will soon move into Cornwall, but it will remain windy here. However, it should be fine. A fine evening to come across London and southeast England, though here too the wind will be freshening. Some heavy rain moving in across Wales this evening, with the heaviest bursts at times in the west and south. Gales are likely in western coastal areas. At this stage, it should be dry across the Midlands, albeit with cloud continuing to increase from the west. Temperatures will be around 9 Celsius with a strengthening south-easterly wind. A fine dry evening to come across north-east England with plenty of clear spells, becoming quite chilly in sheltered areas inland, but milder towards the coast where it will be breezy too. And it's a fine dry picture across central and southern Scotland this evening with light winds and clear spells. It will be turning quite chilly as the sun sets, but a very different evening across Northern Ireland where we are back into the rain with some strong winds too, especially around the coasts of Down and Antrim. Tomorrow, rain will continue to push north and east across much of the UK overnight, with showers following. Windy with gales around some western coasts, and that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for your company. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch today about what a woman is defined as. Susan says, what's all this nonsense about defining a woman? A woman is someone who is born with a vagina. Chromosomes define what sex you are. You can cut or add bits to a body, but you cannot change your biological sex. How arrogant of people to put themselves higher than Mother Nature. Women have fought for decades for our rights. A minority are trying to destroy them. Catherine says, come to a definition of what a woman is. It's clear to anyone with an ounce of sense what a woman is. Why are people pandering to this nonsense? Mike says, Putin got one thing right. It's only the West that's tearing itself apart with the ridiculous gender/woman debate, and politicians are too weak to call it out. We didn't fight for equality rather, and women's rights for decades just to see it all undone on the altar of political wokeness. Now, folks, the Home Office says that more than 1,000 visas have been granted to Ukrainian refugees under its new scheme to provide shelter to those fleeing the country. In East Yorkshire, Anastasia Mania shared her story after a 2,000-mile journey, whopping 2,000-mile journey to the UK from Ukraine with our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley.
2 weeks ago, Anastasia Manina was woken by the sounds of shells falling in Kharkiv. She fled to an underground station for shelter with her 5-year-old daughter before escaping to Romania, and then travelled to the UK to stay with her mother in Hull. She was given a 6-month visa. They've both been here for more than a week, but are uncertain of their future. And Anastasia also fears for those left behind.
There are no actual procedures for such people as me from Ukraine in Great Britain, but I hope they'll come soon from the government. There is a lot of bad news from my country, and I stay in touch with a lot of people there, checking if they are alive. You know, I'm a strong woman, but I've never thought that I have to be so strong to overcome all of this tragedy events.
In Yorkshire, Anastasia is volunteering to help with humanitarian efforts for those still in Ukraine. She's also praising the work of those who've stayed behind to fight, like her twin brother, who's part of the country's armed forces.
I know that Ukraine not only survive, but it will be a great victory. I believe in it because I see how people are united there. I see how strong they are, and I'm very proud of every Ukrainian man and woman who fights for our independence. And there are no doubts it will be a victory.
More than 2 million people have now fled Ukraine because of the Russian invasion, according to the United Nations, and the EU believes the total number of refugees could climb to 7 million. Anna Riley, GB News, Hull.
Heart-wrenching stuff from Anna Riley there. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. We're going back to basics next. We'll be looking at the immigration policy of the UK, where it works and where it doesn't. But now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's 32 minutes past 2. President Zelensky has demanded the immediate release of the mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov. It comes after Ukrainian authorities released CCTV footage which they say shows Russian forces abducting him. GB News cannot independently verify the video. However, it's reported he was kidnapped from the city, which has fallen under control of Vladimir Putin's forces. A war against Russia in Ukraine would be World War III. That's according to US President Joe Biden. In a tweet, he stressed that the United States would defend every inch of NATO territory, but said a direct confrontation must be prevented. Meanwhile, the US continues to send troops to assist NATO allies. 130 soldiers have deployed from Fort Stewart in Georgia. The bulk of Russian forces are now around 15 miles away from the centre of Kyiv. That's according to the UK's Ministry of Defence. Meanwhile, the cities of Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy and Mariupol remain encircled and they're suffering heavy Russian shelling. President Zelensky has accused Russia of refusing to allow people out of Mariupol, but says they have managed to deliver food and medicine there. New research from the TUC says energy bills could increase at least 14 times faster than wages this year. They say that gas and electricity bills are set to rise by 54% when the price cap changes in April, but average weekly wages will go up by just over 3%. The government spokesperson said it recognised the strain families were under and it's introducing a £21 billion package of support. On TV, online and on DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll be back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes after this short break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. We're joined now by Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, the Conservative MP for the Cotswolds, who raised an urgent question in the House of Commons this week. So, Geoffrey, you wanted the process of getting Ukrainians into the UK to be sped up. How would you actually advocate or propose that the government do that?
Well, I've had two interventions in the Commons this week, one on the urgent question and again on Thursday. I'm glad to say that some of what I was calling for has now happened. The major step is that anybody who's got a Ukrainian passport can now apply online, which means that they don't have to travel sometimes huge distances to a centre to get accredited. So that is the first major thing that's been improved. We will get from this week the sponsorship scheme, where any individual or any business can actually sponsor Ukrainian to come to this country and possibly give them accommodation and food. So again, the wheels are turning, but to my mind, still far too slowly.
Yes, and there's some controversy. Of course, President Macron has been out saying that the government's response hasn't been good enough. Do you think that the whole controversy around Calais is because of the, as you well know, the crisis at the English Channel that has been going on all of last year, and so insofar as we're into this year too? Do you think that's why the government is loath to actually do anything as far as Calais is concerned?
Well, again, I was pushing on this subject as well. They are setting up a processing centre at Lille, which is where the cross-channel tunnel people are processed. So, and they are going to provide, they say, transport from Calais to the short distance to Lille. So it may make more sense to do it in Lille, where they've actually got proper facilities. I don't really mind where they do it, as long as they speed it up.
Yes, so Boris says he'll give the details of a second visa scheme on Monday. What do you think we can actually expect from the announcement? I'm not asking you to be Mystic Meg. I assume we've got some sort of indication of where the government's going on this.
Well, again, I think they need to simplify it all. They insist on the forms being done in English. If they insist on the forms being done in English, as I was saying in the House, they need to have adequate translators to make sure that people who don't speak English and don't read English are able to fill the forms in properly. And their forms are hugely complicated. I think they could simplify them. I think they need more staff in post, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not 9 till 5 from Monday to Friday. That's just simply not acceptable. And I actually think we could probably go further. We could send a few transport planes out to Poland and actually collect several hundred of these people who've been sitting and waiting around in reception centres. So I think there's a lot more we could do.
Yeah, I mean, Sir Geoffrey, the United Nations have said that more than 2.5 million people have now fled Ukraine, more than 1.5 million refugees crossing the border into Poland. The UK has taken in over 1,000. At a time when, as you well know, we've got an NHS crisis in this country, we've got an education crisis in this country, we've got a housing crisis in this country, there's not enough social houses to go around. How many, realistically, people do you think we can take in? Because a lot of viewers watching this show now will be saying, yes, well, it's all well and good for Sir Geoffrey to say, as my heart does too, goes out to these people who are in the most dire situation, where their homes have been potentially destroyed by Russian warfare. Do you actually think there's a problem in actually saying, come one, come all, into the United Kingdom?
Well, all I can tell you, Darren, is that I've been out in my constituency this morning, and people have come up to me and said, I'm Labour, I don't normally agree with you, but actually on this, you are absolutely right. The British people want to be generous. There's a large number of people, I think, out there who would more than happily welcome a family into their homes, at least on a short-term basis. This is what the British public want, and I think the Home Office and the government should be stretching every sinew to do this. Now, I accept, as you say, Darren, they've had all sorts of difficulties with COVID and everything else. I also accept that they've had to process over 100,000 British nationals overseas in Hong Kong. They've also had to process people coming.
Yeah, I mean, do you actually think, though, we can afford it? Can we actually afford to do this?
Can afford it. We're a wealthy country. These are the same family as us. They are Europeans. Unlike some of these other crises, I think we need to be generous, and that's what the public want. If that's what the public want, and they're right to want it, then the government should respond.
Well, Sir Geoffrey, though, just saying they're Europeans, therefore, you know, let's be generous to them. People might well point to other countries around the world that have been suffering war. You've got the Yemen, you've got Syria, you've got other places where actually we haven't been as generous to them. Some might say that we've got quite an exclusionary refugee policy here.
Well, I don't know whether that's the case or not, but all I do know is, talking to my constituents this morning, that they actually want us to be generous to the Ukrainians. They've seen the horrific shelling and bombing that's been going on in that country, completely, caused by Russia. And they actually think it is so ghastly that we ought to be do what we can to help. And I know we've been very generous in terms of humanitarian aid. We've been leading the world in sanctions. We've been leading the world in some weaponry. But actually, they're saying that's all very well, but actually we want to welcome. I mean, after all, 1,000 into a country like us is a pretty small amount. When you have on your bulletin that the European estimates there may be up to 7 million people. Now, these are being accommodated in Poland and the frontline states at the moment, but it's only right that we should all, and we want to, share the burden of that.
Sir Geoffrey, I don't know if you've got a spare room, but will you be welcoming a refugee into your home?
I would potentially. The problem is that I moved from the country during the week and then up to London, the other way around, to London during the week and my constituency at the weekend. So I'm not permanently in one place, but I would certainly look to see how it could be done if it could be done.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown there, Conservative MP for the Cotswolds and the Treasurer of the 1922 Committee. Thank you very much for joining me on Real Britain today. Following on from what we've just heard, today in our virtual classroom, we're going to be looking at Britain's immigration policy in our Back to Basics feature. There's no one better to speak to than Steve Valdez-Simmons. He is the Amnesty UK Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director and joins me now. How do our migration policies actually work when it comes to Ukrainians fleeing from a war zone?
Well, we have a system called our immigration rules that set out who's permitted to come to the country and in what manner are they permitted. And one of the key things that has affected the response to Ukrainians and indeed many other refugees from elsewhere is that our system demands that listed countries or listed nationals from particular countries can only travel on visas in order to get here to ask for our help. And Ukrainians are on that list. And that is why there is such concern about the need for the bureaucracy of obtaining a visa in order for someone to make a reasonable and easy travel journey to the UK, because they can't just hop on a plane because their passports will be checked and simply arrive here. Of course, our immigration system doesn't work like that for everybody. Some people are permitted to come to the country, can just get on a plane and arrive at the border and ask for permission to enter. Those tend to be countries from which we do not expect to receive refugees. But that's how our immigration system works, and that's why the issue about the visa is such a controversial subject and is hampering the speed of our response to this crisis.
So, Steve, what do you say to those who might have security concerns then, who might say, well, how do we know that someone's not just claiming to be Ukrainian and saying they've lost their passport, for example?
Well, we do that precisely as we would in other circumstances at the border, at entry clearance, at the desk, as we would from many countries where no visa is required. And people do get stopped and told that, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to enter because the check at the border has decided for whatever reason that the person should not be allowed to enter. So it's not that security checks are necessarily or only done through a visa system. Visa requirements clearly prevent people with urgent needs to travel from doing so before having to go through a process. And we don't deal with that for everybody. We could decide to waive that here.
Steve, what do you say to those who say actually Britain is full and that we're seeing the green spaces of England especially being pushed back in order to actually make room for housing? Where are people going to actually go? What would you say to those arguments?
Well, I think we have to be a little bit realistic about the state of the world and our responsibilities in it. If we decide that we are a country that will not receive a share of responsibility for people who have to flee conflict, whether in Ukraine or elsewhere, we won't find that people will not come here. What instead we will find is that other countries increasingly take the same sort of stance as we do, and fewer people find safety elsewhere, and more people find themselves making very dangerous journeys in the hands of very dangerous people, including to our country. We only have to look at what's happening in Poland at the moment. Poland, yes, geographically is a larger country, but it's far, far poorer than ours. And it is receiving a very large number of people. We are receiving very, very few. And that is the case for any crisis that you can point to around the world. And either countries like ours share some responsibility, or I'm afraid we see the sorts of scenes we do at Calais and in boats in the Channel.
Well, when you read that we've only taken in just over 1,000 refugees, did your heart go out and say, well, I think we've got the capacity to take more and therefore we actually should? Will you, for example, be taking a refugee into your home?
I'm be perfectly frank with you and honest. I have no plan to open my home to somebody. I don't have very much space in it, but I will certainly support and do what I can and do support the welcome that can be provided to people and support my local community, making what space is available here and elsewhere to people who need to flee. I don't believe that there is a problem of being able to host a significant number of refugees from crises and conflict. This country can find the capacity if it wants to do so, and it is better for us, and indeed more efficient and cost-effective for that matter, to do it by opening regular routes for that, rather than just trying to shut the door and finding that more people do arrive in chaotic circumstances like we see in the Channel.
Steve Valdez-Simmons, thank you very much for your time there. Amnesty UK Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's now 2:49 and it's time for Grime Watch. One place where we can all have our say on what's going on in the world is social media. So during Grime Watch, we'll hear what you've been saying about news stories this week. One of those was about John Bercow. He was found, former Speaker of the House of Commons, of course, he was found to have been a serial bully while House of Commons Speaker. Bercow, now he was there for 10 years, 10 whopping years, between 2009 and 2019, in a time which included debates, of course, about Brexit. Lots of you have been getting in touch about Bercow. On Facebook, Andrew said, this report is so deserved of the awful man. You only had to listen to the way he spoke to MPs in the chamber to assume what he was like away from the media glare. Very interesting point. Jane said, is the evidence of him being a bully the same as the evidence of Home Secretary Priti Patel being a bully? On a similar theme, Mikey also tweeted, Priti Patel was found to have broken the same code of conduct, but Boris decided to turn a blind eye to it. Sort of makes it impossible for the Tories to attack Labour on this one, I'm afraid. Thomas said he certainly tried his best to stop Brexit, but his best wasn't good enough, thank God. Jeffrey said he started out as a right-wing Tory. Clearly he decided that it was not a path to power and fame, so he became a left-wing supporter of Labour. Odious and deceitful little man. Dina tweeted, Berko had the sense to oppose Brexit, and now we see the results. Well, interesting thoughts, folks, I'm sure you'll agree. But it's important to add, Mr Berko said the inquiry into the complaints was amateurish and based on tittle-tattle. And that's all we have time for on today's edition of Grime Watch. Now, to end the show, we're going to have a campus clash, two students going head to head. Today's question is this. Does this government work for young people? Here to fight the corner, I'm joined by Nina Skinner from the University of Bristol and Billy Roberts from Newcastle University. Does it work for young people, Nina?
Yes, I'd say that it certainly does. We've seen record levels of investment in, particularly on mental health for young people. This government's bringing 400 new mental health teams to schools. There's also been investment in T-levels, job training programs for young people in the wake of COVID. And there's also been record levels of investment in health issues that particularly affect young people. So I think it certainly does.
Billy, what would you say to that? I assume, are you of the view that actually, I'm not sure you could say the lockdown policies did much for people in the way of mental health?
No, they didn't, unfortunately. So I think mental health is one of those bigger concerns. And I think coupled with some of the new inflationary pressures and the rising costs of living that some young people that are really suffering with, like energy and fuel crisis, that's going to really hit hard for some of the people that are especially really young. And since there's a extra cost for these young people, there's going to be surging mental health crisis.
Nina, are you worried? I mean, I have no idea what your socio-economic background is, so I do forgive me for actually prying there, but are you worried about getting on the housing ladder? Because millions of young people are actually saying, I just cannot afford to do it.
Yes, it definitely is a concern for me, especially as someone who wants to live in London. But something that I have to assuage that concern is the Help to Buy scheme. And in the financial year 2019 to 2020, a record number, 55,600 first-time buyers used that scheme in order to buy houses. And I don't believe that home ownership is a right. Home ownership is a privilege that comes with economic stability, personal economic stability.
Billy, then, are you worried about that? Do you want to just come back on what's just been said there? And also, are you worried actually about never seeing a pension, for example?
Well, pensions, we're going to retire a lot later than some of our grandfathers and our grandmothers. It's one of those things that we have to sort of accept, because we're not going to be able to get, we mentioned housing, we're not going to get onto the housing ladder. We're going to be renting for most of our lives, unfortunately. So actually, we're going to be stuck in that consistent paying off our rent rather than having a secured home that we can buy.
But what do you say to Nina, though, saying, well, actually, I don't think housing is a right, so suck it up, buttercup? You didn't actually say that, Nina. I added on that flourish.
No, it's not a right, but unfortunately, it's because it shouldn't be a right. However, the average house prices have increased dramatically, and I don't think it's fair that our grandfathers and our grandmothers, for example, have that element of, we were able to buy us at this price. Sure, there's differences over the years, but I don't think we should be able to, we don't have that right to say, well, it's so much more expensive for the same 21, 22-year-old.
Yeah, can I just ask the two of you then about the green agenda? How can burdening young people with a net zero agenda that's going to cost billions and billions of quid be beneficial to young people? Is this not putting a noose around the next generation as far as the debt burden is concerned? Nina, I'll start with you.
So, yeah, I do absolutely agree. I think that net zero by 50 is not realistic, and it will do far more harm than good to people's livelihoods. And then, of course, all the things that follow from that, like people's health and job prospects. And you've mentioned before the green belt, which is, something that needs to be massively altered and redacted if new houses are going to be built to make home ownership for the average man and woman affordable again. And yet nobody's voting for a party that will do that. So yes, we as a generation have problems with housing, but it's something that A, in a democracy, we have the power to fix, and B, we're not doing that.
Yeah, Billy, just in a word then, does this government work for young people? Have you changed your mind?
No, I unfortunately haven't. It's the nature of the Conservative Party.
Beautifully put. Thank you very much. Nina Skinner and Billy Roberts, thank you very much for your time. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, folks. Cheers ever so much for your company. The show's back tomorrow at 2 p.m, but for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and heavy rain and strong winds will affect Northern Ireland, Wales and Western England, but mostly dry elsewhere. Let's take a look at the details. A wet and windy evening in store across much of southwest England, though something a bit drier and clearer will soon move into Cornwall, but it will remain windy here. However, it should be fine. A fine evening to come across London and southeast England, though here too the wind will be freshening. Some heavy rain moving in across Wales this evening, with the heaviest bursts at times in the west and south. Gales are likely in western coastal areas. At this stage, it should be dry across the Midlands, albeit with cloud continuing to increase from the west. Temperatures will be around 9 Celsius with a strengthening south-easterly wind. A fine, dry evening to come across north-east England with plenty of clear spells, becoming quite chilly in sheltered areas inland, but milder towards the coast where it will be breezy too. And it's a fine, dry picture across central and southern Scotland this evening with light winds and clear spells. It will be turning quite chilly as the sun sets, but a very different evening across Northern Ireland where we are back into the rain with some strong winds too, especially around the coasts of Down and Antrim. Tomorrow, rain will continue to push north and east across much of the UK overnight, with showers following. Windy with gales around some western coasts, and that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Start off your GB News Sunday with Stephen and Anne at breakfast from 6 a.m. At 10, join the political correction. From 12 till 6, it's Alistair, Darren, Inaya and Nana. At 7, join Free Speech Nation for a laugh that won't be cancelled. At 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight, followed by Headliners. That's Sunday on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.